Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm KERVIN, City Club President, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike. Those of you who join us today at Sentinel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. Today we will be pleased to welcome Hank Paulson, former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, but first some announcements and recognitions. I'd like to recognize the following public officials in the room who have joined us today. Would you please stand, and we will hold our applause until the end of the list. U.S. Judge Ann Aiken, Oregon Treasurer Ted Wheeler, County Chair Deborah Kafori, Mayor Charlie Hales, County Commissioner Jules Bailey, Oregon State Legislators Ann Leininger, Tobias Reed, Michael Dembro, John Davis, and PSU President Wim Vival. Next week is our final program of the summer, Butting Heads, Post-Competition and Combat Challenges. Dr. James Chestnut, chair of TBI Initiative at OHSU's Brain Institute, will interview General Corelli. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at today's event. You can follow or mention us at PDXCityClub, and be sure to follow the conversation by using the hashtag RiskyBiz, B-I-Z, PDX in your own tweets. Craig Wessel will facilitate a question and answer session with Hank Paulson at the end of today's program. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high, and City Club staff will collect them prior to the start of the Q&A. And now for our program. It is my honor to introduce RUKAIYAH Adams, who will introduce today's program and speakers. RUKAIYAH will be starting as the Chief Investment Officer at MEYER Memorial Trust next week. She serves on the Oregon Investment Council, the state oversight board that manages approximately $100 billion for the Oregon Public Employees Retirement Fund, the State Fireman's Fund, as well as other state and municipal funds. In service to the OIC, she sits on the Private Equity Investment Committee, and RUKAIYAH also serves on the board of directors of Portland Center Stage and is the co-chair of the Oregon Infrastructure Innovation Task Force. RUKAIYAH holds a BA from Carleton College with academic distinction, a JD from Stanford Law School, and an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. At Stanford Law School, she was an editor for the Law and Policy Review, and at Stanford Business School, RUKAIYAH was the CEO of Challenge for Charity, Inc. It was the largest student-run enterprise, and under her leadership raised more than $800,000 for Special Olympics in 1 year. Please join me in welcoming RUKAIYAH Adams to the stage.
Thank you to the City Club and all of the professionals who have helped to put this together. That bio is a little bit embarrassing. It's almost as long as Secretary Paulson's. That's a little scary. Oregonians embrace environmental stewardship. The connection between science and our economy is one that we are willing to make, as demonstrated by our thoughtful urban boundaries, our investment in public transportation, and our emphasis on sustainable living. Many Oregon businesses reflect and share those values as well. Last week, over 70 Oregon businesses announced their support of state action for clean fuels and reducing carbon pollution. We will continue to evolve our understanding of the causes and effects of climate change so that we can adapt and thrive. This afternoon, we hope to advance our public conversation. That advancement begins with two people, Mr. Craig Wessel and Secretary Hank Paulson. Craig Wessel is the publisher of the Portland Business Journal. He's had a long and distinguished career in publishing and management. When I first met him, he looked so clean cut and crisp, I thought, how much Google research can I do to find out something interesting about this guy? I had to go down a few pages, but discovered that Craig knows how to feed his creative side. He studied composing and arranging at the Grove School of Music in Los Angeles. Mr. Wessel is deeply rooted in the Oregon economy. He is or was on the boards of the Software Association of Oregon, the Oregon Entrepreneurs Forum, Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Portland, Junior Achievement, the Dornbecker Foundation, and the Oregon Bioscience Association. Mr. Wessel, we look forward to your musical and business perspectives, helping us to shed light on the regional and local implications of Secretary Paulson's work. The other conversant is Secretary Hank Paulson. He served as the 74th Secretary of the Treasury under President George W. Bush from July 2006 to January 2009. Prior to that, he had a long career at Goldman Sachs, serving as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer beginning in 1999. Earlier in his career, he was a member of the White House Domestic Council as well as a staff assistant at the Pentagon. As you can see, Secretary Paulson has seen our central government from many different perspectives. What you probably don't know about Secretary Paulson is that he's a China expert. Today, he serves as the founder and chairman of the Paulson Institute at the University of Chicago, a nonpartisan institution aimed at strengthening the economic and environmental relationship between the United States and China. He is also a best-selling author. His next book, titled Dealing with China, is expected to be released in 2015. But the most interesting is that Secretary Paulson is also a lifelong conservationist. He was the chairman of the Nature Conservancy. During his time at the Nature Conservancy, he founded and co-chaired the organization's Asia-Pacific Council. In 2011, he also founded and continues to co-chair the Latin American Conservation Council. He has an informed and unique view of the global economic consequences of climate change. Of all the remarkable things that Secretary Paulson could talk about, we're here to discuss the findings from his work with the Risky Business Initiative. That initiative seeks to quantify how much economic risk the United States faces as a result of climate change. Mr. Wessel will engage Secretary Paulson in a discussion of the recently released Risky Business Report. This report zeroes in on some financial and business consequences of climate changes, in some cases down to the regional and state level. We will save time at the end of the discussion for questions from the audience. Because we're all so eager to engage with Secretary Paulson, he has graciously agreed to jump right into the conversation with Mr. Wessel. Portland, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Secretary Hank Paulson.
Expected. So that's a welcome usually reserved for Jimi Hendrix, Hank, but we... Hank, thank you so much for being here. And maybe to sort of provide some context to our conversation, we could start off with you launched the Paulson Institute shortly after you left the Treasury. And I wonder if you could talk about the genesis of that organization and then how it led you to the Risky Business Project.
Okay, well, Craig, thank you. But first of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you to the City Club for sponsoring this. You are in a great city, in a great state. I love coming here a lot, not just because I've got a son and a daughter-in-law and grandchildren, and I root for the Portland Timbers, but I also, I love the people of Portland and the outdoors. So now, to China. Now, when I left Treasury and I was saying, how can I best continue to be engaged in issues that make a difference, the reason I decided on working with China was to step back. I decided I wanted to do things only in the not-for-profit area. So I was focused there, and I looked at China as incredibly important because I believe the U.S.-China relationship it's a difficult relationship, it's a complex relationship, it's going to become more complex, but if we think about our big global challenges, whether it's the economic challenges, the environmental challenges, foreign policy challenges, they all become easier to solve if we're working with China, and they become very, very difficult to solve if we're working at cross purposes. And since I knew and know the Chinese leaders, the current president and general party secretary of the Communist Party, I've known for years. When I was Treasury Secretary and went over to set up the Strategic Economic Dialogue, before going to Beijing to seeing the president, then President Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, the premier, I first stopped and saw Xi Jinping, who is now the president at Hangzhou. So I've known them, I've worked closely with them for years, and to me, first of all, the next 300 million people going to the cities in China are going to drive global economic outcomes, and importantly for all of us here, environmental outcomes. We are not going to meet the climate challenge unless China is part of the problem. So what we have is a think and do tank. It is focused on specific projects, getting things done around environmental issues, economic sustainability. I don't go there because it's not great fun to take 14-hour flights and breathe the air. I'd much rather, this is a vacation for me. But I go there because it's the best way I can make a difference, and I think all of us have to figure out the area where we have a comparative advantage, and for me, it's working on these big, tough issues in China.
Did you consider getting China engaged with the Risky Business project at this point, or was that just beyond the scope of what you were able to do?
Well, the Chinese have done studies understanding the economic impact of climate change on their economy. I mean, I started talking to them about it years ago. When I ran the Strategic Economic Dialogue, we put together the 10-year framework on energy and the environment. And I had extensive conversations. They matter of fact, sent me up to the Qinghai Plateau with their top climate scientist and the top scientist from the NSF to really look at what it was doing to the glacier up there. And so they understand it. They've got their problem is a practical problem. That the breakneck growth, despite their huge investments in renewables, is just overwhelmed everything, and the environment is a big, not just economic issue, it's a huge social issue. Great stress. If the party and the government is going to maintain credibility and stay in control, they have to do something to meet this. So it's a great area for our two countries to work together. And what I do with the Paulson Institute partners and with other NGOs and with businesses. And so if we're working on an air quality project in the Beijing, Tianjin, or Bay Area, we will have U.S. companies and experts working with us. When we work on sustainable urbanization, we work together. So we're doing those things. But I want to come back to risky business, because risky business really connects very closely with what we're doing there. Because what happens in China, in many ways, when you look at the amount of carbon that's being emitted, and it is going to be emitted, it's much more important than what happens here. But that misses a point, because we're not going to solve the problem unless our two countries are working together, and you need to have leadership from the largest economy, the leader of the, of the developed world. And so we have to get our own house in order, and we have to engage with the Chinese. If our two countries work together, we've got a very good chance of avoiding some of the most adverse outcomes of climate change. So then you get to risky business, and risky business, it does something which hadn't been done before, which is it quantifies in incredible detail, right down to the county level, but clearly by region and by business sector, the economic risks. So we all know, I'm very concerned about climate, as I'm sure most of the people in this audience are, the threat of climate change. And I think everyone knows that it's a big environmental issue, with a threat to our ecosystem. We know that, but it's an equally significant economic issue, and it's a threat to the living standards of our kids, our grandchildren, all of us. But we need to understand the economic risks, and we need to be able to understand them. And what this study does is helps provide the detail to really have a substantive conversation with business and granular with granular specifics, and not just the most likely case, but looking at best cases, looking at worst cases, which is what every business needs to do when they're making decisions. And so that is, I think that's very important. And it's important because businesses, when you look at China, our strongest channels are economic channels. And the strongest ties we have between our countries are business ties and economic ties. And, these supply chains are global. It used to be China was sort of the manufacturing floor. We'd exported a lot of that there. The global supply chains are changing, just like they're changing in the U.S. And so again, businesses need to look very carefully at this and incorporate that into their decision-making process.
Was there anything that came out of the report that really surprised you? What were the most sort of exceptional findings from the report, as far as you're concerned?
Craig, it didn't surprise me, but boy, did I take notice of the fact that there's a disproportionate, that the climate risk, climate change is going to hit different business sectors and different regions disproportionately. And that has many implications. We focused on some of the areas that are hardest hit. So, there's a big section in this on agriculture, housing, the coastal areas. So regionally, when you look at it, the Southeast gets hit very hard. When you look at temperature, when you look at what happens to the sea level rise, particularly on the all up the East Coast, but the Gulf Coast. So the Southeast. This region is very interesting because this region. Well, let me say something about agriculture, because I'm from Illinois. I grew up on a farm, and when you look at the Midwest, central Midwest, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa gets hit very hard. And, you know, and you're not talking even 50 or 100 years from now. When you're looking out 10, 15, 20 years from now, when you take a look at some of the farms that have benefited from being in a temperate zone becoming arid, it doesn't help the farmers in Illinois feel better to know, well, guess what? You know, farmers are going to do better in Canada and better if you go farther north in the U.S. Well, let me say something about Oregon, because you all probably care about that. And you are located in a good location, relatively, but sort of the headlines are, you know, when you look out at the end of the century, that Oregon will be at least as warm as Texas in terms of the number of days that are not 95 and above. I was a little bit surprised on the sea level rise, because even though you're closer to the poles, when you look at sea level rises at Astoria and so on, they're much less significant than on the East Coast and on the Gulf Coast. When you look at, because you also, in addition to getting the summers are warmer, the winters are also warmer. When you look at power costs, the cost of electricity because of hydro and so on, your power needs go down, those costs go down. And when you look at some of the obvious solutions, like you look at things, if you just look at it simplistically, like a carbon tax, where you've got, British Columbia's got a carbon tax, you've got cap and trade in California, and a carbon tax doesn't really hit this area hard, because in terms of the cost relative to the benefits. I happen to think it's something that makes sense everywhere. But when you look at it here, you're going to see this area will be a magnet for energy intensive manufacturing, clean energy, and you've already seen some of that. So those are the positives. I would say the other is I joke to people, I think that's assuming that the status quo remains the same around the country, which it won't. I imagine there'll be a few people that will move here. You may have a few Texans for neighbors. So maybe you better buy some cowboy boots and some Western hats.
That may be the most frightening aspect of the report, Hank, but...
Well, I was told to scare people.
You know, but the other piece of the depth at which the report goes to around geography and economic sectors, I thought, you know, the other effect of that was to really personalize those results, and it really gets to the psychology of climate change and the sort of human nature that we only sort of take action when there's an immediate crisis. And how do you address that?
So I'm going to address that, but I want to address something else first, because you triggered it with a question. So this report is bipartisan. Okay, so we wanted to. So we've got Republican Treasury Secretaries, George Shultz, Hank Paulson. We've got Bob Rubin, who's a Democrat. We've got business leaders from very important sectors like agriculture, with the chairman of the executive committee of Cargill. We've got some Henry Cisneros from the housing sector, and from Texas, Donna Shalala, who is a university president and from Miami. So we've done that. And the other thing we've done, which really gets to your point, is we don't deal with solutions. We want people to come together and have a rational conversation and understand the risks, and then figure about what to do about it, rather than fighting about the solutions. Now, part of the issue we deal with, and part of the challenge with climate change, gets to your question, because the science is clear in terms of the fact that it's human emissions warming the Earth, okay, that is going to lead to climate change. But it isn't clear in terms of the magnitude of the impact or the timing of the impact. And so, you know, one of the things I learned in Washington is it's hard to get, you know, Congress to do big, difficult, controversial things unless there's a crisis or unless, you know, the voters who are responsible for their jobs want them to. And so my own view about climate, when I looked at the risk, I spent a career working with risks and understanding and trying to understand and manage financial risks. You know, during the financial crisis, I dealt with the failure of risk management systems, which took almost our economy to the brink of failure. And so when I look at the similarities between these two, I see some similarities and differences, but which gets to your question on immediacy. So first of all, the excesses have been building for some time in with the climate bubble, just like they did with the credit risk and, you know, the financial excesses that brought us to the financial crisis. They each have their roots in, you know, and the excesses, you know, one hand it was debt, right? On the other hand it's greenhouse gases, which are nature's way of charging us compound interest. So you've got that. They both have their genesis in flawed government policies. What are the policies like Fannie Mae, Freddie, other policies that cause us to borrow too much? Here we've got policies that cause us to be addicted to carbon-based fuels. But a huge difference, which makes this crisis, and gets to your question, Craig, so much crueler, more perverse than the financial crisis. Because at the financial crisis, it's possible for the government to come in at the end, and there's plenty of hardship, but avoid the most adverse consequences. You know, both of these crises have got some outsized tail risks that are significant. But in climate, you know, when greenhouse gas goes in the atmosphere, it's up there for hundreds of years, and it's cumulative. And so if we wait too long, the good news is if we act soon, we can avoid the worst consequences. If we wait too long, all we can do is adapt to them. So it's frankly, all those that say to me, oh, we should get more information, that's radical risk-taking. Radical risk-taking to wait for more information. So now, getting people to act. How do you get people to act? And I could be very pessimistic if I wanted to look at Congress right now. I could be pessimistic. But the reason I'm not a pessimist is I look at what's happening in city after city and look what's happening in certain states. You look at what's happening in New York City. You look at what's happening in Portland. You know, you know, it's really energizing for me also to read about the climate declaration and businesses coming together here. And so there's other things that people can do. So as I said, most of what I'm doing is focused on U.S., China. But when I think about the U.S. and what I can do and what risky business can do, I come back again to business, because when business isn't doing enough and investors aren't doing enough, these are big risks. And it's only when we incorporate them, when businesses, and the businesses I think are the best managed I've ever seen in my lifetime. So U.S. businesses are doing a great job. But I would like to see these risks incorporated into the business decision-making process. And I would like to see businesses talking to their government representatives, to their legislators, and explaining the risk to them. I would like to see investors demanding more transparency. You know, what are the carbon emissions? If you can't measure it, you can't deal with it. What are the risks? What are the stranded assets likely to be? And so, and the last point I'll make, and again, I've, you know, for most of my life, I've been concerned about this in terms of conservation, biodiversity, which is very, very consistent and goes hand in hand with climate. But the other thing that this report did for me was help me understand what a huge fiscal, in some ways, moral hazard we have here, fiscal liability. You know, we all know about the entitlement programs and the liability there. Just make a couple comments about climate. And these are arguments I use when so many people are against solutions involving their government. So there's a whole group of people that are against big government, so they don't want to hear about the solutions. Well, here's what I say to them. What happens every time there's a natural disaster? Killer hurricane, superstorm Sandy, forest fire, flood, whatever. There's human crisis and disaster. Who comes in? The government. The government comes in, it always hits one group, one industry, disproportionately hard, and then we all socialize it, we all pay. That's the role of government. And so when I look at the fiscal deficit that is going to result from climate at both the business level and at the government level, I think it's got the potential to be huge if we don't act. And there are things that we can do, the things that every business can do today whenever they're making a long-term investment in terms of if it's, you know, power infrastructure, where it's built, hardening it, in terms of building in industrial processes that will stand the test of time, et cetera, et cetera. So in answer, and you all see that brevity is not one of my virtues. I will try to. I think he asked about, but you do see here that, but this is an issue I care a lot about. I don't have the answer how to get Congress to come and take immediate action. But I guarantee you that if investors and if rating agencies, when they're rating bonds to fund infrastructure, or if investors, I saw the treasurer of the state of Oregon was here, and boy, this is, you know, you all have had very enlightened investment policies, okay? In terms of if investors start saying, we want disclosures, we want to understand the risks, we want all of us to understand the risks, I think that will make a difference. And if I want to be an optimist, there's a lot of good stuff that's going on already in this country. And young people really care about it, and they really get it. And so I think, and the last thing I will say, which is more of a negative message, is I spent a bunch of time with scientists. I'm not a climate scientist. And most of the conversations I had made me more concerned rather than less concerned, because it's very, very hard to predict. And just because we can't predict the magnitude of the timing with certainty, the reason I don't feel better is we have a complex ecosystem. And when you look at these negative feedback loops and you look at what scientists are doing, they're conservative, they're looking at historical information, and they're extrapolating for the future. But we're operating in a new world of man-made emissions. And I just look at the change, just look at the facts. Less than a decade ago, scientists were saying we may have ice-free summers in the poles at the end of the century. Now they're saying the next decade or two. There's a whole series of things that they hadn't projected earlier. So who knows what they're going to be saying, 5 years from now.
Hank, when you talk about getting Congress to act, And I suspect you sort of had to walk this balance with the financial crisis a lot, and that is, you know, the regulatory versus what happens in the private sector. What does getting Congress to act look like in your mind? What are the actions that you would see that would really make a difference in this?
Well, I would say also, you know, one of the things that I'm proudest of is, although it took a crisis, twice we got Congress to act before there was absolute disaster. It would have been Armageddon. And so twice, and we worked, and I would have had no chance of success if we hadn't begun working very hard. And I forged alliance with all sorts of Democrats, and it was Democratic, it was the leaders, you know, the Harry Reids, the Nancy Pelosi's, Barney Franks, in addition to the Mitch McConnells, Judd Gregg's, you know, John Boehner's, and so on. So Congress did act twice before we had Armageddon. Now, when you say what is happening right now, as this was not part of the Risky Business Report, and I want to say this over and over again because some people want to attack the Risky Business Report, because when I wrote an op-ed, someone asked me, you can't write an op-ed without saying, what do you do about it, right? And I had to declare what I thought was the best and the right solution, was putting a price on carbon. Right now, you know, you can emit this pollutant, pay nothing, and you know, I've been around long enough to watch the passage of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, you know, and it didn't mean the end of the world. And I look at it and say, if you want to change behaviors, you put a price on carbon, and you create incentives for investment in renewables, and you take away all the subsidies. We're paying people to find and use, you know, carbon-based fuels. So I suggested that, and of course there's. Now, you find out there's many forms a carbon tax can take in terms of what the, you know, how you ramp it up, what the revenues are used for. They can be returned to the public. They can, a portion of it can go to lower income Americans, so it's not regressive. You can use it to increase the competitiveness by reducing the corporate tax. Make it pro-growth. There's a lot of different things you can do. But what I found when I said that is what an emotional issue this is. So people coming up to me almost with tears in their eyes, thanking me, and then people that on the other side just reviling. And to me, this is just a simple mechanism. So to me, that's one action. But there's other actions. I don't favor regulation with the EPA, but in light of their regulation of carbon emissions, stationary sources, but I do favor it as opposed to doing nothing. And so since there's no carbon tax, since I view this as the problem of our age, how could I be against something that is a proper step? So there's or is an incremental step that is doing something. So again, that would be one form of action, but this is not. I actually think the best service I could do and this study could do would to have people start in the middle. We were talking, a number of us were talking this morning about farmers, and making the point, if you start talking to the corn growers and the Farm Bureau and say, well, guess what, 40% of the emissions comes from ag, and how would you like a carbon tax? You know, it doesn't go over real well. But yet they are as focused, they see what's happening. They're living with the consequences. They're seeing the droughts, they're seeing the heat. If you ask them, do they want Monsanto to spend more money developing heat-resistant and drought-resistant new seeds? Of course they do. And when they're building their facilities, or when Tyson is going to build and make a long-term investment on a chicken breeding and hatching facility, are they going to build it with the resilience it needs to stand up in the temperatures we may see 10, 15, 20 years from now? You betcha. So I think there's the important thing is I think that this study can do is start businesses talking about this and incorporating it in their processes, because a lot of what we're going to see is already baked in, and they just need to make smart investments. And so again, I'm not going around advocating a carbon tax. I know I'm going to get the question, and I know here I'll get great applause, and I imagine if I were having this same conversation in Texas, I wouldn't get people standing up and clapping, but yet they could probably use it more.
Hank, one of the things that I thought the report did, and I'll ask this question, then we'll go to questions from the audience. I think the microphone's right over here, and if you have for members, and then if you have a card at your table, hold it up, and one of the City Club folks will come around and collect that. One of the things I thought the report did really well was not just to talk about sort of the really dark side of where we're headed, but to paint a picture of a few different paths. One being if we stay the course we're on now, which was quite terrifying, and the other being, the other couple being, here's what happens if we take these mitigating steps. And so I was really surprised that you didn't sort of go after a course of action, that you didn't advocate for a course of action along with this report. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that was essential. In fact, I think one of the most important decisions we made was not to advocate, to say, here's a report I have yet to read. Now, Kate Gordon is here, and Kate, you might stand up and raise your hand. So give her a big applause. So the co-chairs of this report were Tom Steyer, who came to me with the idea, and he's a prominent investor in California. Mike Bloomberg, who has done a lot of work in this area. Each one of us might have had a different view on certain policy responses. Bob Rubin might have a different policy response than I might, or George Schultz, or whatever. And I'm sure we could have come out with something that was mealy-mouthed on that or whatever. But it wouldn't have been, even if it were clear, it wouldn't have been as powerful as we want to start this conversation in the middle. We wanted to depoliticize it, take the emotion out of it. Let's look at the facts, and let's really, and again, this wasn't aimed at businesses, and this wasn't aimed at this was aimed at business. This wasn't aimed at the general public, and this wasn't aimed at politicians. We picked certain sectors. We picked housing. We picked ag. You look at power. We looked at the coastal areas, and so we said we want to start the conversation, because only then are we going to, if we could energize investors and businesses and get people to just say, wait a minute, this is not just some emotional issue. We need to treat this like any other economic issue, any other risk. And all those that say to me, we don't know for certain. Well, do you know for certain if you're going to be in a car accident? Do you know for certain if your house might burn down? Why do you get insurance? And why are we, even if something is a 1 in 50 or a 1 in 10 or 100 risk, why do we want to, when the consequences are huge, want to ignore that risk? So the conversation is, how do we go about protecting ourselves and managing these risks? That's what that did. Now, again, this study was the first step. Okay, this study was the first step. There's going to be follow-on work that is done after this, and there's going to be, so there will be, you will see more work done around business, because I think business is a huge part of this, and so you will see more work done around business and climate, and I'm going to keep spending a lot of my time traveling back and forth between the U.S. and China.
Thanks, Hank. We have a question back there.
Kirsten Green, City Club member. Thank you for being with us today. You just mentioned energizing investors in the business community. Could you give us your advice as we move towards considering a carbon pricing mechanism in Oregon? Could you give us your advice on how to articulate what we would do with the revenue?
What to do with the revenue? No, I wouldn't. But I will say something about carbon in Oregon. Of course, in some ways, state taxes are suboptimal because we've got, we're a nation. But the advantage of Oregon is you look at the region. So you fit right into the region. Even Quebec is, is part of the California system, cap trade. You've got carbon tax right in British Columbia. And as I said earlier, when you look at this, it should be easier. You get legislators to do, government to do what makes sense for voters. And when you look at the voters here and you look at your economy and your region, I think it makes much more sense. And when you look at what you can do with revenues, it's very interesting because revenues can be used for a whole variety of purposes. A carbon tax is regressive in the sense, and I think you all know what that is, so it hits all segments, and lower income people still need to purchase gasoline, still need to, and so some segment of it almost always is returned in some way, and through a tax credit or something. And people argue about whether that should be 20, 25, 30%. But then there are things that can be done to make this much more competitive in terms of creating jobs and growth. So doing things in terms of simplifying, reducing corporate taxes. I'm just not sure what your tax situation is here, but I think but I think being able to attract more high quality jobs here is something that's really would to me be very attractive. And you look what's already happening in the Northwest. There's in Moses Lake, Washington, BMW is now manufacturing their electric cars there, but so you could do things along those lines. Some people think about it as a dividend, and you could tax and just give it all back to the people in one form or another. And there's a variety of other uses in terms of for this. But again, to me, I don't know enough about Oregon, and I'm not going to get into that other than to say, I think if there's one state where it should be an easier sell, it should be this one.
So another question from the audience. Hank, the pressures to continue extracting fossil fuels are enormous. And so is anyone with risky business sort of looking at how you offset that? What are the changes in lifestyle or whatever else it is that need to happen to offset that?
Well, again, risky business didn't deal with us, okay? Risky business looked at the economic risks of climate. And to me, what we need to do are policies that promote renewables and cleaner sources of fuel. So the whole key is going to be, to solving this globally, because again, the energy markets are global, carbon emissions are global. A ton of carbon emitted from India or China is every bit as harmful as here. So again, the key is developing and deploying new, cleaner sources of energy. And to me, that's what it's all about. And I think that, and then there are some big national security benefits too, not being dependent on, oil from the Mideast or Russia or propping up rogue regimes or whatever with, importing oil. So again, there are no easy solutions, but again, for me, and again, I'm saying this is Hank Paulson, this wasn't the Risky Business Report, the first steps are not just a carbon tax, but eliminating all the subsidies, they go to carbon-based, fuels. And so I got to tell you, renewables could compete just fine if people had to pay when they polluted, and we were on a level playing field.
Another one at the mic.
Yes, Richard Boyd, Sharp Work Foundation, member of Portland City Club, member of Cleveland City Club since 1981. First, I'd like to thank this fine audience and for your presence and your efforts in your position. As we well know, the Wall Street Journal reported recently, we are beginning to export oil for the first time in a long time because of the fracking industry. You speak of renewable industry and the impact it could have. As we know, how much energy does it take how much energy does a windmill and other renewable sources generate? My contention is this: I am a card-carrying Republican. I disagree with what you are saying. The reason I say this, I think you speak of taxes and revenue as opposed to employing the American public. Our fine president decided to go against the Keystone Project that would have generated a lot of jobs. Right now, America needs jobs. Yes, the renewable industry will provide some jobs, but how can you guarantee this is just not a marketing ploy to sell these new high-tech products? Thank you.
So is the question about Keystone Pipeline, is that? Yeah, I want to know what the question is.
No, the question
maybe
is this.
Maybe you could clarify.
The question is this. Let me clarify. How can you tell this fine body of people that this is not a marketing ploy with respect to generating this false image that carbon emissions are changing the climate as opposed to normal cyclical meteorological transitions?
So I guess, Hank, what he's just asking, well, what's your response to people who will still say, climate change is not a result of man-made activity, of human activity?
Yeah, well, I think there's always, when I spend a lot of time talking to people that are doubters, and there are still some people out there, that are, maybe there's some people out there that believe in a flat Earth, but I think that almost all scientists believe, as I said, that human activity is leading to carbon emissions, which is warming the Earth, which is changing the climate. But there's significant debate about the timing and the consequences. And so when people argue, and when I confront people that say, we don't have all the information we need yet, we don't know for certain, what I do is I come back and say, yeah, but do you know you're right? How do you know you're right? We're talking about significant risks here. And if we don't act, if we wait until we get all of the information, and we will be looking in the rearview mirror and it'll be too late. We'll be at the scene of the accident. So, so to me, it's not even a matter of trying to convince them that, how dire the consequences may be. I mean, I'm frankly hoping they're right. I'm hoping there's something out there some of us haven't seen, and it's not as bad as it looks. But, you know, I asked them, do you have insurance on your home? Do you have insurance on your car? Well, how much risk do you want to take with your kids? And yeah.
Thanks, Hank. Next question.
Kurt Webering, member. If I understand it right, your group is holding back from making specific action recommendations, and yet you personally favor carbon tax. So let me ask this. Would you favor it that for major development actions, that there be an environmental analysis which defines what the carbon impact is of, let's say, building a refinery for oil or a coal-fired plant? Would that go in your direction of having more information out there about carbon impacts?
Well, first of all, let me just be clear on this. I think I may have confused things. I wrote an op-ed in the Sunday section of the New York Times where I advocated a carbon tax. I can tell you unequivocally, our group didn't discuss this. We don't have agreement on it. There are people that feel very differently about what the solution is. Everyone in our group agreed that this was a major problem, okay, when they looked at it. So we all thought it was a major problem, and some of those that, you know, in the course of the study came to the view that it was even a bigger problem than they thought going in. So that was true, number one. Number two is we haven't decided what the next phase is going to be. We've still got work to do in this phase in terms of spending time with the different communities, spending time with the farm groups, the business groups, the coastal communities. There's a lot of different ways to go. And, you know, your suggestion has merit. There's a lot of things, and there's a lot of work that's being done already. So, again, I'm not quite sure what the next steps will be other than making sure that people understand this report, but there will be some next steps involving the business community.
We have time for one more brief question, please.
Dave Porter, City Club member. Given that there are risks, would you advise Oregon business and political leaders as an economic development strategy to increase trade with China?
Well, I would say this. I wouldn't be necessarily increasing trade with China as a result of the of climate, but I feel very strongly that our economic competitiveness is very, very important. You know, to step back further, if we're going to continue to be a leader in the global economy, if we're going to be a leader in dealing with environmental issues, it comes back to the competitiveness of our economy. We need to be strong. We need to fix our economy. And the only way you're going to fix the economy, in my judgment, business is doing pretty much all they can. Businesses are, I've worked with business for 40 years. Business is better run today than they've ever been. Business leaders are stronger, better leaders than they've ever been. But we need structural fixes for our economy. We need a new tax system. We need immigration reform. We need, I could just go on in terms of entitlement reform. And trade is also something that makes a big difference, having trade agreements. So the agreement, that the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the Obama administration is pursuing is very important, and that will help. I also think business links with China. Chinese investment here that creates jobs, direct investment. We've had a lot of U.S. investment in China, but if you look at the history of foreign investment in the U.S., it creates jobs and it creates higher paying jobs. So attracting investment and more investment dollars to create good jobs in Portland is key. And then the other thing with China is working. There's a good number of examples of Chinese provinces working with U.S. states, Chinese cities working with U.S. states, sharing technology, working together, giving China the chance to learn what you're doing. When I go and do work on sustainable urbanization in China, I bring U.S. experts. There's a very good city planner, Peter Kelthorpe, who I believe is from Oregon, actually, who goes with me, and for a number of these things. And so there's a lot that you can do back and forth with China, which will help strengthen the relationship between the two countries, which is going to be tested because there's many tensions and complexities. So there's a lot that can be done, and I'm a big believer in trade. Trade makes a huge difference and helps drive this economy. You know, I went, on the way here, I went in with my wife Wendy to Colombia and bought some of the, you know, some shirt, pants, etc. that I use when I do saltwater fly fishing. Those are made in, I didn't look to see whether they're made in China, but they're made somewhere in Asia. So again, that's a case of trade helping China and helping Oregon, and we need more of that. So thank you. You've been a terrific group. It's fun to be here.
And as we close for today, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Hank Paulson, Craig Wessel, One Pacific Coast Bank, as well as Oregon Environmental Council for their partnership on this event. And thank you to Andy Petkus Photography for the photography today. Thanks for listening.